Hello from floaty hot London. So a few days ago I took the bus in London for the first time, and it completely opened or freed my experience of the city. And I wondered, why hadn't I taken it before? I mean, I've been coming to London for the past 2 years. Why hadn't I ever taken the bus? And I mean, this video is not about how to take the bus in London, but rather two things that I thought related to that experience. One has to do with, I guess, losing the fear of looking or appearing ridiculous or silly when trying new things, new experiences. And the other about why the bridge between something known and something new can feel so challenging at times, especially as an AuDHD person. I mean, I've always recognized that transitions have been challenging for me throughout my life. I mean, even before I realized I was neurodivergent. I remember even, in a novella that I wrote several years ago, I even talk about that in the book. And one of my earliest memories of when I was a child, my parents they separated when I was young. So my father lived in the US and my mother in Mexico. And I remember even though I knew that it was coming, I knew the place to where I was traveling to. The moment when I had to say goodbye to my mother, for instance, and my friends in Mexico, even if it was only going to be for a month or so, was always so difficult and so challenging. And I also remember from that experience that at some point I just as a child, I decided to cut the feelings from the moments of transition because they were so intense. And and thinking about that, and of course now understanding my neurodivergence a little bit better, I can understand how, let's say, the autistic part of my brain, just to say it in a certain way, because obviously it's not like there's a part of my brain that's autistic and another that isn't, but you get my point. The autistic experience sort of has me craving or feeling comfortable with routine, with stability, with known things. But at the same time, I have always liked new experiences. And not only have I liked new experiences, but I have always throughout my life gone out of my way to pursue those new experiences. I've talked a little bit about that in this channel, but I've had many different career paths, and I've lived in many different places and countries, and and I've gone traveling for long periods of time. And essentially, you could think that my life, especially in the past, 10 years, but probably all my life is it's like a big example of unstableness. In the past 2 years, I've been jumping between the UK and Mexico, and not really having a lot of certainty in terms of what I'm going to do in the next months. Right before that, I was coming from almost 2 years of traveling around the world just with a carry-on, and and I have often thought how is it that I enjoy those movements so much, when at the same time the transitions are so challenging for me. And of course I have my my systems. For instance, when I traveled for a long time by myself with this carry-on, I knew that I wouldn't, at least not normally, stay in a new place for only a few days or a week. So I would make sure that I would stay in a place for at least a month. In that month, I would usually try to find like a base, a place that, even if it was just for a month, I could call my own. And even if it wasn't if I arrived and I found out that it wasn't the best neighborhood or the most beautiful apartment, I would try to stay there just so there was a little bit of stability. So I do have a lot of I don't know, like systems or coping mechanisms. But at the same time, it's, I don't know, it feels like a contradiction. Like, on one hand, I really love new experiences, and on the other hand, they really terrify me. And in this, in this time that I have, been having this seemingly unstable lifestyle and lots of movement, I have found or learned that one of the most important things, at least in my experience, when trying new things, is being okay with looking silly or looking ridiculous. And I actually remember one of my acting teachers saying this to us when acting. He used to tell us, you have to lose the fear of, in Spanish, the translation would be of performing ridicule. But he essentially would, it was tied to the fact that, I don't know, when you try new things, that's when, sparks of genius and beauty can come out. In this scenario, it was related to, to performances and human behavior. But I think it's similar when trying new things, and especially when traveling. But think about it, when we learn a new thing, there's always going to be obviously a learning curve. And, and in that period of time where you're just learning that new thing, you're going to make mistakes, or, it's quite likely that we will make mistakes. If you're learning how to knit, at the beginning, you're going to probably lose stitches, and, the things that you make are going to probably look quite kind of wonky. If you learn a new language and you're brave enough to start talking to people in that language, you'll probably get funny looks at the beginning. Maybe you'll find yourself saying something that, I don't know, that maybe even offended somebody else without you knowing. What I mean is that, there's a period of time when trying new things where you're going to make mistakes. And that is fine. I think that there's a distinction when those mistakes, for instance, in the knitting example, if you're knitting, you can do it by yourself, and, the quote-unquote mistake isn't kind of perceived or experienced by others. You're not judged. If you try new things like speaking a language with somebody else or traveling, the feeling or seeming ridiculous isn't, it's not longer only your judgment. Sorry, the coffee machine just went on. I'll wait for it to stop. I don't know how noisy it'll be in the video. I love that machine, but it's so ridiculously noisy. And I definitely don't like it in the mornings, because it's right next to, so over there, that's the room where we sleep, and the vibration of the coffee machine is so intense. Anyhow, I even lost my thread of thought. But what I was saying is that when you are, when you're looking silly, or you make a mistake, or feel ridiculous because of something you did in front of others, that adds a layer of awareness of yourself, and maybe the other people aren't even noticing it, but you might feel silly or ridiculous, or or whatever. But that's going to be normal in experiencing new things. I remember when, the first time that I was in Oslo in Norway, the first day that I arrived, I remember I managed to take the last tram to the place where I was going to stay. And, and I like to do my research, and I like to kind of know things in advance, and I try to, get everything in place. But, so I knew the stop I needed to get off at, and, and I stood up, moved towards the doors when my stop was coming, and I was waiting there with my big backpack, for the doors to open, and they didn't. It was the last train as well, and and the doors didn't open. I wasn't able to get off my stop, and I was just standing there kind of looking, I felt quite silly and ridiculous, and not only looking myself around as to what had happened, what had I done wrong, but also feeling that I was being stared at. And and the thing is, I didn't know that you had to push a button to open the doors of the train during winter, because I had never been on a subway where you had to push a button to open the doors. And, you know, and I mean, for instance, when I went to Nepal, I went to meet a teacher that I had dreamt of. And I did my research, and I asked and I tried, but when I actually met him, I had to be guided and kind of, what's the word? Like corrected a few times as to how I was supposed to greet him. And I just felt like I looked like a very silly foreigner. But when you travel, especially, or when you encounter a new culture, those things are just going to happen. And I think that if we are respectful, if we do our research, if we mean well, it's fine. It's fine to look silly, to look ridiculous, to make honest mistakes. And it's also quite beautiful, because I think that's how cultural exchange happens as well. I mean, not even only like the culture of the countries, the nationalities of the people interacting, but also the personal culture. Even here in London, after a few years and having a British partner to guide me, I still have many faux pas, when interacting with other people, because I don't know the cultural code. And until it becomes a second nature, we're always going to be kind of thinking about, how to do it or how not to do it. But there's something very beautiful in also bringing your way. When meeting people from different cultures, it's really beautiful to see, the things they care about, the things they notice, even the way in which they form their phrases. If their first language is different to yours. So that's one of the things. So, and, feeling okay with, if I translate it literally from Spanish, of performing ridicule, of looking ridiculous, looking silly, because that's going to happen. And it's also tied to something that, to being okay with being a bit uncomfortable. And I think this is something that I learned through mountaineering and also in Norway. Because when you're in high altitude in the mountain, I guess in any hike, but you're always going to be uncomfortable. There's always something that is a bit uncomfortable. Maybe you're a bit cold, maybe you're a bit hungry, you're a bit hot, you're a bit tired. There's always a bit of something. But the labeling something uncomfortable, that bit of heat, that bit of cold, it's just because we are measuring against the kind of like the baseline of, let's say, feeling comfortable in our own environment, let's say our home. But when realizing that, at least for me, when I would be in high altitude mountains, when I realized that was just going to be the baseline, that I was just always going to be a little bit uncomfortable compared to being, lying on my couch reading in my house, then, when you unlabel it as uncomfortable, it just becomes a new normal, and it doesn't feel as uncomfortable anymore. And I remember when I was in Norway, I traveled to the Lofoten archipelago. It's a really beautiful place. And I lived in this little game, so it's a Sami-style hut, essentially. And it was really tiny, and it was in the middle of the mountains. It didn't have electricity or water. And, every time that I would have to go down to town to get supplies or back up to the hut, which was, I don't know, like an hour walk, it would be inevitably raining, always. And where I come from, when it rains, you don't go out of your house, you stay. Now I have understood, I think, that the rain is different. It's the same water, obviously, but I don't know, you get wetter, I think. But anyhow, in my learning and my experience, water or rain equaled being uncomfortable and staying at home. So the first times I would just be like, oh gosh, it's raining again. But then I started also noticing that, rain wasn't something that stopped Norwegians from going out and doing their things. And I started to try to apply the same thing that as when I went mountaineering, and just seeing, rain as one more experience, as rain. And when I took the label of being uncomfortable away from it, it was just something that was happening. It was, okay, yeah, I might feel a little bit cold. Maybe I don't know, maybe I'm too tired for this right now, or maybe I don't really want to have time to dry, whatever. But it stops being something that drags you down, and it just becomes something that you're experiencing. And I think that is nice, and that can also be applied to when we try new things, Feeling ridiculous or feeling silly is probably going to elicit uncomfortableness, and it's okay to be uncomfortable. I think so. And the other thing that I was thinking about is how it can also be a bit challenging when being AuDHD, because going back to the example of the bus, for instance, I know that I prefer knowing what I'm getting into. So, for instance, when, I don't know, if my partner asks me if I want to go and have dinner with some friends of his, I personally like to know, for instance, how many people are going to be there, because I know that, if it's two other people, I'm going to feel more comfortable with the conversation, and so I can prepare for that. If it's going to be a large crowd, I know that, my energy expenditure will be different. So I like to prepare for that as well. I also like to know where the restaurant or the venue is, so I can kind of understand, for one, how much time I need to prepare for leaving, but also, how much energy I need to have, for leaving, if we're going to walk for, 30 minutes, or if we're going to ride a bike and I'm going to have to deal with the sun, whatever. So I like to have those knowns, to kind of, like get the lay of the land. Even sometimes if I'm, for instance, if I'm going to start taking classes at a venue, I like to, walk to the place, kind of see it from the outside, see it in the inside before I actually take the class. And with the bus example, I think it's something similar. So, all the time that I have been here, when I have to go somewhere, I've either walked, taken the subway, because I took the subway the first day, or take a bicycle, because one day I took a bicycle with my partner, and we also have bicycles here, so that's something that I can just grab and do. But the bus I had never taken, even though there were, many times where I would see the place where I wanted to go, and I saw that the bus route was much simpler. But because I had never taken the bus, I would just opt for the thing that I knew how to do. And it's not only because I thought that taking the bus would be difficult. I of course knew that it would probably be very easy. But for one, not really knowing what I had to, or what I would expect, or what to expect, was kind of like a barrier, even if tiny, but a barrier. And the other one is that since I know that, that there were several things that I needed to research before being able to get it, to take the bus, when, let's say I needed to get somewhere in 2 hours. Instead of, and I have the, the option of the bus, walking, or, or the tube. They're not equal options for me, because at least until a few days ago, because the train, I already intuitively know how to get there and what steps to take. Walking as well. But the bus didn't just imply another decision, it implied also a series of tasks that I had to spend time and energy in researching, how to pay, if I needed a card, if I could pay with my credit card, if there were specific protocols that I needed to know about, where the bus stops were, etc. And it might sound silly, because of course these tasks could probably be resolved in 5 minutes, which is the time that actually they took. But, because beforehand you don't necessarily know how long they will take or how much energy, it just immediately becomes something much more complex. And to be fair, a few days ago when I actually did learn how to take the bus, which is ridiculously easy, of course. I mean, it wasn't because I made the choice of learning how to take the bus, but rather because there were other variables that came into play. So for one, a few weeks ago, I had to write an article for work, and I learned that it's normal to say thank you to the bus driver when you leave the bus. So I kind of felt that I knew something about the culture of bus riding in London. And the other one was the heat, because in a cooler weather, a cooler day, I would have probably just walked. It was like a 45-minute walk. But in that particular day, 45 minutes under the sun and in this heat was just unbearable. So the uncomfortableness of the heat outweighed the uncomfortableness of a possible silly feeling moment. And, so that kind of, pushed me to do the 3-minute research of how to use the buses in London. And the funny thing, or the beautiful thing, is that once once I have the experience, it's like something unlocks. And because I could potentially still have many ridiculous moments on the bus, but they don't matter anymore because I already have kind of like the visual experience. And I have heard this from other neurodivergent individuals. So I think and I mean, it might happen to other people who aren't neurodivergent as well, but I do see a correlation with neurodivergence and this type of, feeling more comfortable when we know what to expect. I mean, I think that's kind of common as humans, but it may become more heightened with neurodivergent individuals. And what else did I want to say? Yeah, so I think that, I mean, as I mentioned, all my life I've known that transitions are difficult for me. But I also feel that before I was not like this. I feel that in the past 2 years or so, life feels much scarier. And I mean, I think it has happened, since I discovered I'm neurodivergent. One of the reasons I think is burnout, because, I mean, for instance, in London, it's a little bit better, but in Mexico City, I mean, it's a wonderful city, don't get me wrong, but it's a city that hurts me a lot because, it's just so intense, and you go out and there's so much noise and heat and the sun and the lights, and it's just a lot all the time. So, when during burnout, going out of the house is potentially, I'm at great risk of being hurt. So I think I started kind of, relating going out into the world with being hurt, which was really heightened by burnout because I didn't have, extra energy to deal with all of that. So that was one thing. And the other one, I think that as soon as I discovered that I'm neurodivergent and I started kind of understanding or learning more things about it, it sort of gave me the license to feel or assume that, the fear that I'm talking about, which is nice in a way. It's nice to kind of be able to put words to it, to understand where it comes from, and to, to be able to feel it in the body as well. But now I think that my next step is, not to let the fear stagnate my emotion, because I mean, I don't want that. I don't want to live with fear, and I've never lived with fear. I mean, I have fear, I experience fear as probably everybody or most people, but I don't want it to, to halt me from experiencing new things. So anyhow, that's all I have for you today. That's what I wanted to talk to you about. And as per the usual update, I am still in London, easing into life here. As I mentioned, it has been very hot and I struggle a lot with heat, but I'm coping quite well. I mean, as best as I can. I think I might be getting out of burnout, which is really great. Maybe I'll talk about it in a different video. But I just feel ridiculously grateful and happy to be here, in this beautiful boat with my partner and my cat, and I mean, beautiful food and beautiful views and beautiful people, and it's just really, really lovely. And yeah, maybe I'll introduce you to my cat and show you the view of on deck because it's quite special. Have a nice day. This is beautiful Harley. Saluda, preciosa. And this is the view from deck.